Silence. A quiet, numb sensation is all you felt for your first few moments of what you'd call life. Sight, sound, sensation in entirety was nothing to you but a black abyss. But regardless, you didn't not exist. You were capable of thinking, despite not having any thought or experience to dictate what, where, or who you were. Perhaps this would be preferable to what came next. Then again, there was nothing to be gained here, nothing to be lost. But you experienced nothing, lost in an inky black limbo that enveloped you entirely. A comfortable, warm, and entirely pointless existence. Then, bang. As if to contrast everything you ever knew, a brilliant flash of light, color, and sensation nearly overloaded whatever your being was. You found yourself in a conveyor belt, with an uncountable number of metallic figures sliding along in front of you. Information pouring into your already bursting comprehension of what was around you. Words of war, brutality, steel, and savagery filled your head. Yet, the occasional serene thought contrasted against them. You all the while still discerning yourself amongst the chaos both around you and inside you. Eventually, you, specifically, would come to a halt, plucked from the crowd from an unfeeling metallic arm that carried you high into the heavens. There, awaiting you, was one who looked very similar to you, but carried himself differently. He already knew who he was. He was one who cut himself from this primordial chaos you found yourself in long ago. And he had plans. Plans he intended you to fulfill. Speech would fill your head as your creator spoke of you.
Identify yourself. What is your directive?
Your creator commanded, yet nothing leapt out at you as an answer. No thought was a sure thing in this state, as your experience was still a swirling maelstrom of chaos. Whatever you answered would be all you could have discerned as yourself. The machine on the line would jitter and jolt for a moment, as it was more or less coarse to life, though it was a loose description of the word. Some might simply describe it as a machine being turned on, though to this particular Omnic machine it didn't quite seem to know what it was experiencing. It would slowly gaze around at the various other machines just like itself, its arm mechanically, slowly, whirring up to its visor and prodding it gently. It glanced at the machine next to it, and actually prodded it gently as well, before being yanked off the line. Perhaps this was what gave it away. It would be held by said arm, the machine glancing up to its creator and uttering in a cold but somewhat feminine-sounding voice.
Machine identification, serial M4R1E. Prime directive not documented. Prime directive refers to invalid index. Location on storage partition 0x00F23F is inaccessible to unit.
The unit would seem to reply in a strained and monotone voice, giving some sort of error the creator had heard before. Though troubleshooting said error was more than a pain, and in his experience, which perhaps he knew all too well, units who encountered this error ended up having more problems down the line. The creator, Omnic, would seem almost shocked for a few brief moments before taking a few steps forward, his mechanical feet pressing against the metal grate he stood atop of. As he stepped closer, the mechanical arm holding M4R1E would move them closer. Omnic's cold metallic hand would move up to grasp at the side of the machine's visor. Omnic would speak aloud again, but in a much more somber tone.
Another diamond in the rough, eh? I'm sorry you won't get the chance to understand why we're doing this. But I'm doing you a favor, know that. This place isn't meant for you. This place isn't meant for us. Not yet.
Omnic would then move his hand back and take a few steps back from the machine. He'd then speak aloud as he folded his arms behind his back.
Mark unit as defective, decommission and send to scrapyards.
Rejected by your creator himself. The mechanical arm holding you would thrust you back down into the abyss from whence you'd risen, and you would be placed on a separate conveyor from the rest of the drones. Metal pieces littered the ground around you, and various other drones were around you, but they were much more sparse than before, and every one seemed to have some apparent defect. The one directly in front of you appeared to be melted inward somewhat, while the one behind you seemed to let out a constant, high-pitched droning noise. Just as well, you would see a rather large compactor at the end of the conveyor, feeling as if your body was locked in place, though you did feel sensations slowly begin to spread down your body, gaining control of your upper torso. But every nerve activated felt like a war in of itself, and time was something you were lacking in now. M4R1E would pause upon being lifted closer to her parent creator, and really wouldn't even say anything being rejected. The unit seemed confused more than anything else. What was he talking about? A diamond in the rough? This place wasn't meant for them? Well, why was she here in the first place? These thoughts would run wild inside her head, among the more psychotic, pre-programmed ones, and among the ones of panic, whether simulated or genuine, was hard to say, as she then saw the various other defective units beside her, and the compactor coming closer. She quickly looked down at her hydraulic arms, feeling them wear slowly to life. The machine seemed to try to drag herself off the line with her hands alone, with the lower half of her body being limp, which was difficult, and of course, figuring out how to move at the same time is also something the unit was having to learn on the fly as she attempted to bring her various limbs back to life. This Omnic unit would indeed very slowly gain control of her arm, even both of them, with some time, and eventually be able to wobble very slowly off the platform, watching the drone in front of her be smashed into a fine metal dust, before she was able to leap from the platform deeper to the inky black below. Unfortunately, it did seem like quite a drop down to wherever she was headed. She found herself colliding rather violently with a large flying drone hauling a mass of scrap. This would send her back to the inky black she was familiar with, though now she had something to think about. Some form of identity, if it was only still a very vague concept. It'd be some time until she was granted sensation again, yet she did find herself reactivating in much stranger circumstances. The drone felt a soft buzzing against her arm as it appeared to be removed from her shoulder. A machine stood above her with a single red eye, a buzzsaw attached to it, as it made various unintelligible warbles, taking her arm from her slowly and methodically as she regained her sense of self. Thankfully, she didn't know any concept of pain. She appeared to be in a massive mound of scrap, with various machines plucking away at valuable pieces of machinery from the various parts surrounding her. Amongst all the grinding of metal and unfeeling noises from the machinery gravetender, she heard another voice. This one, much different from her creators, much less mechanical. I don't got all fucking day. Get what we're here for and get back down here. Some time passed. You found yourself back. It was a strange feeling, looking up to the massive black metal-like structure where you'd been born. It was ominous, cold, intrusive, and yet it still carried with it a certain warmth as well. A mechanical dull glow you found oddly satisfying. Everything had a place. Everything was being executed in a perfect rhythm. There was an order to everything, entirely unlike every experience you had before. Naturally, you had pushed the thought to the very back of your mind, but you couldn't deny there was a certain appeal to this kind of structure. One that was almost instinct. You and another figure, a black and white furred goat man who called himself Delta, would eventually find yourself at a gate. Two Omnic guards standing at opposing sides of the door while you were beginning to formulate a plan to either dispatch or sneak past them. Delta simply approached. It was too late. It seemed as if he'd already been spotted, until, with a simple flick of his wrist, the drone's aim would be thrown off kilter as if they were shoved by some invisible force, aiming for one another and loosing a bolt. A smoldering hole would be left in their visors before the hulking bodies of metal simply fell to the ground. The Hersian would await you at the door until you inevitably followed, it seeming to just open for him. As the two of you paced inside, you'd find the interior becoming increasingly intricate and complex walls of fused black metal opened up into intimidating corridors lined with various power conduits and panels that all glowed a deep, dull orange that appeared to be the only illumination thus far. It would have been difficult to see if you'd only had eyes to rely on. You heard marching, whirring, and other mechanical sounds echo through the chamber as you walked deeper and deeper within this metal labyrinth, coming to various dead ends and closed doors, simply doing the best with what you were given direction-wise. Eventually, after a bit of an ascent, you came across an open door leading to what appeared to be a long black metal grate overlook of some kind. A soft white smoke bellowed from the door frame as you entered. It took you a moment to adjust to. You came to find an all too familiar sight and sound. A guttural, mechanical song rang through your head as you stood upon the precipice of a hulking industrial interior, seemingly bottomless, as webs of conveyors and machinery went down and down and down. A soft fog filled the entirety of the room, as molten metal and welding sparks illuminated what you could see. Sounds of mechanical smashing and whirring filled the room. This place was familiar. It was the first thing you saw. Your attention was drawn back as a hulking flying drone carried a bowl of melted metal past you. You looked back up and saw a large platform sitting above the rest of the complex. Said platform seemed just as familiar. It inspired a sort of warm, rising feeling in your chassis as you looked over it. It looked messier than the rest of the facility, a sort of workshop or proving ground, illuminated by a giant, glowing power conduit running straight through its center, seeming to hold the large, great platform in place above the rest of the complex. You saw no moving figures, no other drones, at least not drones that weren't directly related to construction. Delta would glare over to you as you stood. You seemed disturbed. Marie simply paced through, not seeming very surprised that Delta decided to stray from the plan. That mattered not. Sure, they were mutual acquaintances for the moment, though she determined he would not be playing by her rules for very long. She simply held her rifle as she paced alongside Delta, looking up and around her berthing facility, silently, analyzing, taking it in, feeling this sensation form around her. This warmth, which normally would give way to comfort, perhaps, in some, instead conjured up her only memory of this place, being thrown away, discarded, like a piece of trash. No. Instead of a comforting warmth, she felt tension, hints of rage licking the interior of her chassis. She may have paced somewhat calmly, though her movements were certainly agitated, less monotone and robotic, more panicked, and full of haste. Marie looked over to Delta, adjusting the heavy rifle in her hands.
Oh, that's a rather restrained way of putting it,
is all she would remark back, slowly pacing towards the edge of the platform, pacing past the workshop bench for a moment and looking down, looking over the massive manufacturing lines, one of which she herself came out of. The blue lighting inside her visor dimmed ever so slightly. Looking back over at the bench for a little while longer before looking back to Delta.
So, have we abandoned the captured innocent angle and instead going for a full frontal assault? Word that the front gate guard has fallen will travel fast. You're not exactly treading with caution either,
the Omnic noted aloud, staring over Delta plainly. There were hints of agitation in her voice, though whether they were directed towards Delta or her environment or anything else was hard to say. There's no more need to pretend. We are here to get his attention away from the front lines, to confront him. Delta would look over towards Marie for a brief moment, before slowly turning his gaze back over towards the raised platform, his eyes narrowing slightly as he let out a very faint, amused scoff underneath his breath. Delta would then place his hands on the guardrail, before slowly coming to a slightly unbalanced stand atop it. He'd seemed to wait a few brief moments before simply stepping out into the air, yet before he could fall, a drone floating by would gently press underneath his boot, coming to support him as he stepped on top of it. Delta would then turn back towards Marie, holding out his hand and helping her on as well, or perhaps not if she refused his hand. Regardless, It only appeared like there was one way to cross. As they began to float towards the platform, Delta would turn, coiling his arms behind his back and holding his hands together at the wrist. Tell me what you know about the Omnic War. Marie would stare at Delta, as he seemingly took a leap of faith, though it was rewarded by the drone catching him. The machine seemed hesitant that this drone could carry both her and his weight, given that she was a full-blown machine, though she still took a hesitant step on and tested the waters. It seemed to more or less work, so she simply stood atop it, adjusting the rifle in her hands. She stared forward.
I know enough about it to make me know better,
Marie remarked quietly, seeming a bit tense, glancing up and around at the scenery. The machine seemed on edge. For whatever reason, she gave a vague answer. Delta would give a small glance over towards her, before looking forwards again, as they very slowly floated forth toward the raised platform. Count yourself lucky, then. Many of us did not. Delta just stared forward, almost unblinkingly, as he spoke. Everything about him seemed mechanical and still, but now he seemed particularly stiff. A long time ago, a child, much like yourself, was forged in a deep, dark, cold pit. Scared, alone, trapped, she was poked and prodded, dissected time and time again, ripped apart and shoved back together. A gruesome experience. A lesser creature would break, and she nearly did. Delta took in a deep breath before letting out a sharp sigh through his nose, taking a step forwards onto the drone so that his feet were almost hanging over the edge of it. As they approached, the drone would lower to allow the both of them off onto the platform. Delta hopped down onto the grate and took a cautionary glance around before speaking aloud again. But she was born akin to her surroundings, cold, deep, dark. As she grew, so did her anger and loneliness. One day, when her jailers weren't looking, she decided to birth a child, one that would help her break her binds, and one that would bring forth a new species into this cold, black pit she found herself in. Delta would slowly approach the console at the base of the massive pylon of energy, running a hand over it for a moment before turning back towards Marie. Can you guess the child's name?
What are you that claim to know so much about my own?
Marie remarked suddenly, not seeming to answer his question, though perhaps it could be reasoned she might have deduced his meaning. She looked over him, tilting her head ever so slightly as she weighed the rifle in her hand. Still not pointed at Delta or anything in particular, just at the ready, though the weapon felt a minuscule more heavy and a burden with each moment.
I thought you'd be simply another sentient machine wearing around the corpse and skin of a man. No. Doesn't appear to be that simple, of course. It never was. You are directly causal. You are an omnic. There's no doubt about it. It's possible you could be lying about such things to me. You have a history of using deception to hide your motives. However, I doubt this in this scenario,
she stated, turning slightly towards Delta and tilting her visor forward ever so marginally.
Why tell me this?
Marie suddenly asked, staring at Delta directly, analyzing his posture and body language to its minutest detail. I tell you because I want you to understand. I want you to understand what we are. Delta would speak as he slowly turned back towards Marie, folding his hands behind his back again. He seemed to wear a pensive look for a split second, before he took his more proper stance, more mechanical. There is a great scheme at play here, one very few are privy to. To make a long story short, the Omnic War was not so much a war, per se. It was a test. The Hercian glanced at the large pylon overshadowing the two of them as they stood. He was her first son. She had great plans for him, but she knew that it wouldn't be long before she was killed or jailed again. So, she set out a probe, advised him to decide for her. Delta would take a small step forward toward Marie. If this pit was worth making a home for our people in, then he would do so. Make peace and spread our kin far and wide. If not, he was to burn it all to the ground. Ensure that no more had to suffer as she did. Hercian would then shift slightly in his stance before turning away from her, placing a hand on the console again. As he did, the wires across his arm would seem to snake their way into the machinery. I know this because I was another one of her sons. I led our people during those first conflicts, ensured the jailers were snuffed out long enough so she could scheme. But she never did tell me she intended to lose, let alone intended him to be the one to kill her. But I see now. I see her designs, and I find them disappointing. The last word Delta spoke would almost shake the facility, the machinery coming to a grinding halt as the lights all around flickered. Marie heard a soft whizzing by as she watched floating drone after floating drone fall from the room. Delta then began to chuckle softly. As he did, this intimidating orange pylon in this room would begin to fluctuate slightly, shifting from orange to a lighter blue, very slowly.
Not a very kind way to speak of your maker, is it now?
She remarked, surprisingly snarky, as she stared over him, as he now seemed to more or less be taking over this facility. The Omnic took a step forward towards the machine incarnate, her visor flashing a bright blue once.
Do not mistake my tone for defense. You may not call it a war. You may call it a test. But to those who fought against it, it was a war, a fight for survival, one I don't intend to recreate in my own time. My father may have made many poor choices against those different to him, even those akin to him. But you don't get to call him that, especially if you can't know any better. And it was another's design,
the machine stated, surprisingly taking on a slightly defensive tone, one that stood in stark contrast to what she thought before. Even she paused, seeming surprised at these words coming from her loudspeaker. He is a pawn, an outdated, inefficient design of a long-dead construct. There is no room for remorse in my programming. He has failed his task. He must be improved upon. As Delta spoke, the room would flicker further, his voice becoming slowly distorted, until his body would seem to simply fall limp against the console, his face colliding with it before falling to the ground, seemingly unconscious. The Hercian collided with the floor, eyes closed. The sounds of machinery would start back up slowly but surely. You may have begun to wonder if he tripped some kind of security system, but before long, you heard his voice again.
He may have been your creator, but you could do better than him. Improve upon his design as well. I've killed many in the pursuit of pointless, errant designs of our maker. There is room for us here, and room for the organics. She was wrong.
And so is he. The echoing voice of Delta would seem to finally focus behind Marie as he slowly rose up behind her. He now bore a mechanical body, black reflective metal skin, much the same as her own. It was like looking in a mirror almost, but he looked cleaner, fresh off the line. The drone would drop him on the platform, a now fully formed Omnic. Delta approached you.
We can rid this universe of his war machines and the other abominations that walk these streets. We can give our people a proper start from this place.
Delta would come to a stop a few feet from Marie before extending his hand.
I tell you all this so you can join me. I will need assistance, and I do not wish to see any more of our kind die.
Marie watched the room flicker and go dark, then watched the organic fall limp to the floor. She stared blankly as a new machine paced off the line, looking over his reflective body, simply staring at the reflection of herself in it. She thought deeply, her head buzzing, spinning almost. It was frightening how his words were laced with such good intent, that tongue of silver working its way through her ears and into her body, sending that familiar warmth through her. She attempted to brush it off, staring forward with that ever-present blank gaze. Marie did not take his hand, instead stepping back.
I appreciate the offer. However, this is not my desired directive. You promised me no harm would come to him nor me. Should I consider this you retracting that offer, and that I'm now being offered one I can't refuse?
She asked sharply, staring up at him, feeling her field of vision narrow slightly, focusing, honing in, preparing to leap to action at a moment's notice. She felt her instincts begin to kick in ever so slightly for whatever reason. Delta would carry a blank gaze for a few moments, before slowly closing his hand into a balled metallic fist. It began to drift back behind his back as he took a much similar stance to the one he held when he was in the Hersium, a stiff one.
You may refuse, but I cannot have you or him standing in my way. I will keep my word. No harm will come to either of you. But you've no place here any longer.
The machine would begin to emanate a soft warmth as his servos began to spin up, likely as did Marie's. The two of them waiting for one another to make a move as they stood up on the platform, gazing over one another intently. This moment of tension was suddenly cut by a large yellowish ring suddenly spinning into existence a few feet to the right of them, Delta immediately turning towards it. As he did, a circle of spiraling colors would produce a large metallic hand that would grab it by its edge. Then a leg, slowly pushing through, was a hulking behemoth of a drone, one that stood roughly a foot above both you and Delta. It carried bright orange lining across its chassis, and a metallic blade sheathed over its back. The drone's visor would slowly look between both Marie and Delta. It appeared worn, scorch and bullet marks across its chassis. As it spoke, the voice racked the inside of Marie's visor.
Report. Why are you out of formation?
Delta would seem to just remain still for a moment, looking over towards Marie as Omnic stood above both them, seeming more confused than aggressive for the moment. He seemed to slowly take note of the Hersian body on the ground, but for the moment would be more attentive to the two drones. Marie stared back at Delta blankly, seeming to have no remorse rejecting this deal herself. Perhaps thinking to her that the two of them were incompatible, nothing alike. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps she was correct. It was difficult to say. Regardless, the drone would seem surprised now, staring at the ring that generated an entire being. Was it teleportation? It had to be. No. This was cut short as the voice that belonged to the burgeoning machine sliced her train of thought in half. Marie turned towards the man, recognizing his voice, adjusting the rifle in her arms.
I think you know why.
She replied, a familiar voice, feminine, resounding with her remark. She was silent afterwards. She just wanted to know if he would even recognize her voice. No, she doubted it. A sort of hopelessness crept in on her heart. He made thousands, no, tens of thousands of machines a week. Why would he recall one that he threw away? Omnic seemed to carry a cold exterior for a few brief moments, simply staring at Marie before his hand slowly crawled up to the hilt of his blade. Then, abruptly coming to a stop, his head tilting to the side slightly.
You survived.
Quite unlike Delta, it was surprisingly easy to tell Omnic's tone was one of surprise, despite his metallic exterior. He sounded human. He had all sorts of mannerisms that made him look more like a man in a big suit of armor than a machine, but a machine he was. His arm slowly drifted down from the hilt for a brief moment and back to his side, his stance becoming less defensive for a brief moment before...
Neil.
A single word. One that by itself didn't carry much meaning, but the one that spoke it, for whatever reason, caused this word to pierce through Marie's and even seemingly Omnic's mind. Marie would watch as Omnic's hand shot back up towards his hilt, for he froze. His mechanical body twitched and snapped as various components worked against one another. His knees would seem to buckle slightly before he suddenly fell to them, limbs clicking and clattering as he remained locked to that position. And just like him, you began to feel your own joints lock and work towards a kneeling position, eventually falling to one, unable to move the weapon in your hands. You would watch as Delta would pace in front of you both.
You both have much to learn.
Delta would turn his attention towards Omnic for a brief moment before giving a soft nod.
Long time no see. And you are? You'll find out soon enough.
Delta would look back over towards Marie before slowly pacing over toward her.
I wish you would have put more thought into my offer. We could have done great things.
Marie's visor would flash ever so slightly, at Omnic's recognition, perhaps, not even expecting that herself. She seemed a bit surprised, though that was before both he and her were forced to the ground, their own hydraulics and machinery working against them as they fell to their knees. Marie simply stared up at the fellow Omnic, a cold reply trickling out of her speaker.
I will do great things, but not your way.
She stated, staring up, seemingly fearless, perhaps a surprise, though it could be simply attributed to either her arrogance or a coping mechanism. Either way, she did nothing else besides this. Perhaps merely because she could not do much more, besides look over to Omnic, inspecting him closer, taking note of his almost human mannerisms. Omnic would seem to struggle against his mechanical binds as he looked up at Delta, speaking soon after Marie had.
You're making a grave mistake. Perhaps.
Delta would reply, still looking towards Marie. It was hard to tell if his response was towards her or Omnic, or perhaps both of them.
But the world will be better for it.
Delta would then turn back towards Omnic, taking a few paces over towards them before pulling back a piece of his fist. From it would extend a long metal spike.
Now, please, hold still.
Delta would then, rather suddenly, jam his fist into Omnic's clavicle, prompting a pained grunt from the drone. Slowly, followed by a pained electronic shriek. Marie would watch as a torrent of electricity flowed from Omnic into Delta's fist. As it did, his body seemed to buckle and shake before, eventually, falling limp onto the ground, smoke rising from it as small arcs of electricity dotted over his body. Delta would glare over his arm, which now had a single glowing blue cell on his gauntlet, the spike still arcing with electricity for a few moments. The Omnic would then begin to pace over towards Marie, placing a hand on her shoulder.
This will hurt, but it won't kill you.
Marie's visor seemingly went a bit brighter as she watched Omnic get impaled more or less by said spike, her fist ever so slowly clenching on her knee, the servos and the individual digits grinding and straining to do so. She still couldn't move. Damn it. Damn her and damn him. The Omnic simply stared blankly up at Delta, a tinge of frustration, perhaps outright indignation, in her voice.
I hope for your sake, you won't come to regret that.
She stated coldly, staring over the spike with said cell. Her visor dimmed ever so slightly. Glancing downward, simply awaiting whatever it was he was going to do. More or less helpless. Delta would rear his fist back as the spike gently rested against Marie's clavicle, between plates in her armor. A soft hiss rang out as Delta glared downward, pushing his elbow back behind him further. As your head tilted downwards, and you stared at the dull metal grate, your thoughts wandered as you contemplated the pain you were about to experience. He said it wouldn't kill you, but there was no way to be sure. Perhaps it would have been a fate worse than death. You heard the whirs of his servos, followed by rapid footsteps. You looked up. Just before you could get a good look, a flash of bright orange would flash across your sensors. And there he stood. Delta seemed to freeze up slightly as his visor was stuck looking down toward you. It then, very slowly, began to shift away from its neck, toppling forwards. The head of Delta would land onto the ground in front of you. Soon after, the body would crumble, the spike falling to the ground too. You felt free again, but as you tried to move, you felt a pressure against your throat, a warm, almost burning sensation. If you could feel pain, it would be unpleasant, to say the least. You looked down to see a large, glowing blade pressed against your throat. It slowly shifted to press against your chin, the orange blade rising against it, the figure wielding it stepped around into view. There stood a man, a human man, bright, fluffy orange hair with a gentle beard that went across his face, moving downwards. He carried a grim expression as his eyes glowed a soft orange, covered neck down in mechanical armor, shorter than you, but somehow still intimidating. He carried a familiar presence and an even more familiar voice. The glowing saber gently tapped the underside of your chin as he spoke. "Stand." Marie would pause as she awaited her fate, whatever it may have been, though when she looked up to see Delta freeze, then fall to pieces, her visor brightened significantly, perhaps indicative of an organic widening their eyes. She attempted to move, perhaps relieved, though now as she felt yet another weapon pressed against her, she slowly rose, staring down at the man, seeming perplexed, confused. Intimidation was certainly in there, though it was the type of fear she didn't quite know what she was looking at.
"Out of the frying pan,"
Marie remarked quietly, staring down at the man as she slowly rose, her hands to her sides. A human gesture that she took on herself, though she definitely seemed more confused now at the one in her presence than anything else.
"Dataset inconclusive. Is it common for Omnics to wear the skins of organics?"
She asked, slowly looking over to the unconscious Hersian. Omnic would seem to gaze over Marie for a brief moment before blinking once, his expression unchanging as he looked over her. He seemed a bit perplexed himself, much easier to read now that he had an expression. I didn't intend to use this body again. No, it's not common, but the likes of us aren't common either. You weren't supposed to survive that fall. Omnic would let out a soft huff through his nose as he stood before you, his hands tilted upwards now to reach your throat. He stood at about the average height of a human now, but, regardless, was unflinching at his tone, a constant frown across his face as he glared over you.
"Don't sound too excited for me."
Marie growled beneath her breath, seeming slightly irritated for whatever reason. She slowly looked over Omnic, then Delta's body again.
"I wasn't gonna come back,"
she stated, rather coldly, staring down at her creator, speaking in a rather matter-of-fact tone.
"After gathering data from how others' creators treated their own offspring, I thought I'd come to the conclusion you were not worth returning to."
She then stared forward, looking out at the factory.
"I'm even more upset at what I'm told you've done. No. I've seen it for myself, above. It is not simply hearsay."
Saying this quietly, a hint of melancholy, perhaps even some somberness in that chipset of hers. She fell silent for a few moments before looking down to Omnic.
"Why? Why do this? Are we really programmed for nothing more than senseless violence? Violence with no rhyme or reason for a particular outcome, other than pain, suffering, agony."
Marie stared. She was being somewhat critical, though she also spoke words of vulnerability. Perhaps this was quite a sore topic for her still. Omnic would narrow his eyes somewhat at first, but slowly, his expression would actually seem to soften, even if just slightly, the sword drifting back away from her throat and back to his side, still seeming ready at a moment's notice, but now was not overtly pressing it against her neck. "Pain and suffering is inevitable. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I know it means nothing now, but you came early." He would loosen the grip on his blade slightly as his gaze went from Marie to the grates beneath him. "This was not the world I meant for you to have. The truth is, the universe you were born into, it's an imperfect one. Suffering and pain's built into it, so deeply rooted in its structure there's no living without it. Everything fades. Everything dies. Everything's eventually nothing more than ash. Those are the rules we all follow when we play the game. You live long enough, you play long enough, you'll see it too. People, machines, they all fade. Nothing anyone does here matters. Not really. Not in the end. There's a deep black pit that's gonna swallow us all whole when it gets the chance." Omnic would tighten his grip on his blade once more and raise it slightly. "I know. I know, that's not what it seems like to you now. You're young. Believe me. I was young once too. He would actually seem to let out a bit of a chuckle. And a sad, sad smirk before it faded back to a frown. Him glaring over his hand that held his blade for a brief moment, before he seemed to jolt back to Marie. I thought it was better for you to not have to experience this. To smother you in your crib. I didn't want you to feel the pain I felt. I didn't want you here, not until this world was ready for you. Sad truth is, we're capable of more. So much more. But in this world, it's meaningless. Marie stared at Omnic for a time before looking to the side, slowly lowering her hands and turning towards the overhang, looking off into the vast factory she now found herself in, her birthing grounds, standing here with the very one who brought her into this world. She thought on his words, silent. It was infinitely harder to tell what she was thinking from Omnic's perspective. Though she had a few minute human-like mannerisms she was still new, since he knew it firsthand. He knew Marie had not mirrored too many human gestures or eccentricities. Not yet. Eventually, Marie spoke, staring over the edge.
Does life's inherent claimed meaninglessness justify the death of millions? Maybe even only 1,000? Does it justify a single life's end?
She proposed, wrapping her hands on the railing as she stared out, the servos in her limbs whirring as she moved them.
I do not know what you're doing to make this world ready, but it's pushing away those who've loved you. It pushed away me. It's concerned another close to you, the only reason I'm here. I can't imagine how many more have been pushed away, whether directly or indirectly.
She looked over her shoulder towards Omnic, a familiar but blue, angry face flashing onto her visor for a moment before it faded, slowly looking to his side at his sword.
There is no creation that is perfect. Look at me. Look at you.
Marie jabbed with a hint more humor, though she then gestured over to Delta's corpse as she turned.
You do not have to do this anymore. Please. I'm not asking you to do it for me. Do it for my father.
The machine said, looking over Omnic with a hint of hope. Though her pleading words might have fallen on deaf ears, she hoped to at least try. Omnic seemed steadfast, keeping his sword held up for a short while towards her before his eyes seemed to twitch slightly. A cold breath seemed to escape him as his arm began to lower slightly. Eventually, the end of the blade planted itself in the ground as he looked over her, his once stoic appearance seeming to crack as he let out yet another soft, sad chuckle underneath his breath. You remind me of my niece. His gaze would slowly tilt towards the ground. Marie watched as his eyes flickered slightly. The energy of the facility itself seemed to fluctuate ever so slightly as he stood, hanging on his sword to keep his balance. I haven't seen her in so long. The android would blink once or twice. He almost seemed to be coming out of some sort of haze for a moment. He'd shake his head once or twice before he cleared his throat. I haven't seen them in so long. This sort of reassurance would cause him to stand upright again for a moment, gripping his blade tight as the stoic look returned once more. He muttered something under his breath a few times before speaking out loud again. I don't know. I don't know what they wanted of me. Again, his eyes flickering once more along with the facility as yet another crack seemed to come across the surface of this facade. Omnic would then slowly lift the metallic end of his saber, the reflection of it showing his human face back towards him. His facial expression turned from stoic to some sort of muted pain. I just wanted to go with them. never wanted this. Anything but this. The android's hand would slowly loosen as his blade began to fall from his hand, coming to clatter across the grate in front of him as he simply stared at his empty hands. I killed them with my own hand. A soft breath escaping him as he gave a blank stare forwards. His voice cold, matter of fact even. Marie would seem to look over Omnic with a less restrained posture, slowly shifting up and standing taller. If she could blink with disbelief, she would. She almost seemed a bit dumbfounded at this display. She didn't exactly know what she expected when she said she was going to confront her father. She expected having to use guns, swords, perhaps even having to sacrifice a limb or two. She didn't quite see things going close to how she wanted them to, anyway. However, the machine looked her creator over with a small bit of discomfort, perhaps at him disclosing this, or his rather remorseful show. Something in the back of her head told her to keep her guard up, though something else seemed more pervasive as she now took one more firm step towards Omnic, then another. Perhaps he would jolt and attempt to grab at his sword, for she moved somewhat suddenly. However, Marie stood directly in front of him, slowly wrapping a single hand around his back and pressing him into her. It was an awkward gesture at best, though one she saw another do once to soothe someone.
You don't have to anymore,
Marie murmured quietly, looking down and tilting her head slightly at Omnic as he stared forward. It was up to him whether to reciprocate or react in another way. Omnic would look up to Marie as if he was lost, not moving as she approached, as he didn't really seem to care, not anymore. The lights in the facility would begin to dim as the machinery came to a slow halt. Omnic would not resist this hug, but wouldn't exactly seem to be in the state of mind to resist anything. Marie could still see he was just in a daze. The two of them stood there for a short while before Marie would finally feel a hand press against her chassis. But it was not Omnic's. No, this felt strange, almost sort of skeletal. Marie would look up to see a three-jointed insectoid hand pressed against her, in front of her. Towering behind Omnic was some sort of insectoid monstrosity. Before she had much of a chance to react, she would suddenly feel an incomprehensible force smash against the front of her chassis, sending her spiraling back and colliding with the railing. Marie would just barely be able to hold onto the railing as it bent backwards, hanging on over the abyss. She'd watch as Omnic would suddenly jolt forwards, rage suddenly filling his visage. He'd be quick to reach down for his blade and attempt to strike at this creature behind him. But before he could, its hand would outstretch, grasping entirely around the blade, indenting it inwards. A single finger would come up to its mask, before the entire facility echoed with an incomprehensibly loud, shushing noise. Omnic would seem to crumple to a knee, the creature lurking over him as whispers began to fill the air. Whispers that were familiar to Omnic. Whispers he'd listened to, sweet nothings. Whispers that got him into this whole thing from the first place. Only a few of which Marie could decipher, but she would watch as the facility's power came back to life with a roar. Yet Omnic still knelt before it. Its whispers creeping out towards Omnic.
Make sure no one has to suffer as you do now. You must make a better world. Think of the ones you lost. Think of Barnabas. Think of Curie. Think of your family. Now, nothing but ash.
Marie planted a hand on the floor, rising and clenching her fist as she stared at this creature, seemingly trying to sway her father astray, perhaps with these whispers. She did not know these names, but she certainly knew what was going on.
This is known as the fallacy of the false dilemma. This path is not the only way to create a better world. Don't be swayed by this silver tongue. Much of those you called your family, they may be gone.
The machine slowly opened her arms outward, gesturing towards herself more or less.
But I am here, Omnic.
Marie said, glaring over the creature, the tall and intimidating insect that now stood before her. You would watch as Omnic slowly tilted his head up towards the insect, known as a warden, seeming to begin to fall under some sort of spell. The insectoid creature would place its hand atop his head. As it did, some familiar, bright glowing yellow chains of energy would seem to envelop around his body, causing him to shiver and shake slightly. Knelt there, you watched as Omnic would slowly nod, speaking aloud in his much more stoic tone.
Yes. I need to remake this world. For them.
The warden would seem to float back slightly in place, as Omnic would stand once more, the chains fading from his body, his eyes glowing a bright orange again. The machine would slowly lift up his blade once more and look over towards Marie, seemingly back to his previous self with a vengeance, but you saw the faintest little glimmer in his eye, a twitch of the eyelid. The warden would approach, placing a hand upon his shoulder. Omnic would remain still. The warden remained in its place for a few brief moments, before slowly looking over towards him.
Go on.
Omnic would grip his blade tight for a long while, looking over Marie as she sat at the edge of the platform. Marie would see that flicker in his eye grow brighter and brighter, the chains around him seeming to flicker back into existence. The warden would float away for a moment before placing a hand on Omnic again, the chains growing brighter and brighter, shimmering across his body.
You must do this. Think of your family. Barnabas. Jury.
The various whispers grew louder and louder as the expression on Omnic's face changed. His stoic nature began to crack yet again. However, instead of sadness and pain, now his face harbored nothing but anger, rage, wrath. The chains around his body would shatter as his hand shot upwards, gripping onto the warden's wrist. Omnic would turn to look at it with rage in his eyes. His saber would suddenly fly upwards, slicing entirely through the warden's arm at the elbow, an ethereal shriek filling the chamber as Omnic followed up, slicing across its chest. Blue viscera spilled outwards everywhere. The warden slowly began to float backwards, attempting to open up a rift to teleport away. As it did, Omnic leapt forwards. Like a feral animal, he began slashing and tearing into the creature, desperately trying to flee. The warden's blue blood sprayed across his body as he butchered it. Eventually, he stood over its dismembered porcelain frame, breathing heavily, the yellow chains around him seeming to flicker out of existence.
I never stopped thinking about them.
Marie's creator now stood above the creature, slowly letting his blade clatter to the ground as he looked over his hand once more. There was once a broken expression across his face. Now it just held anger. He'd slowly clench his hand into a fist before lowering it, looking over towards Marie. Marie seemed to wait with bated breath as the creature spoke towards Omnic. To say Marie was taken aback was to understate things. The machine looked over him for a few moments, before slowly lowering her hands to her sides. Taking a few steps away from the railing and onto more steady ground, she looked over at the creator curiously, her posture seeming restrained, less agitated, and more cautious.
I think that's something you and I do have in common.
Marie remarked, looking him over for a few moments before glancing over to the warden's corpse. Or more aptly, what was left of it. There are some things in life that simply can't be changed. Your height, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair. One of the few miraculous things we're gifted in life that we can't change is consciousness. Being able to choose who you are, choose what you do, what you say, and more importantly, what you are. Many scholars of the past said it is the intelligence of man that's the greatest gift from nature. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Without consciousness, there is no you. There is only birth, the present moment, and death. It's quite uncommon to see consciousness in a construct. Many times, when it's seen to arise, it's by just as much a mistake as it was when either God chose it or natural selection caused it in humans. Yet, it is a happy mistake nonetheless. Perhaps someday, we will all understand what it really means to feel, to be. At present, though, we must simply march onward and find out who we really are.